First up is our art segment with our host, Philip Morris. Philip will be interviewing Susan Brome, the executive director of the Empire State Youth Orchestra. They're located right here at Proctors. They'll be talking about youth programs, their fall schedule, and their tour to Asia. Let's watch this one.
Welcome to Impact. I'm Philip Morris, CEO of Proctors and the host of today's show. Our guest today is Susan Brome, the executive director of the Empire State Youth Orchestra, which is one hell of an organization, Susan.
Thank you, we think so.
Yeah, well, give me 2 minutes of what does ESYO, that's the short, do?
And we say SEO
SEO.
instead of ESYO. SEO is an educational organization for talented musicians in the greater capital region. It started out in 1979 as a single orchestra with about 85 kids in it. Now we have 9 performing ensembles, over 300 kids each year, and we have an outreach program. Started out as City Strings, is now City Instruments because it includes stringed instruments and brass instruments in middle schools in Schenectady and in Albany.
So the kids range are 12 to 18, 19, something like that?
As soon as people hit graduation from high school, they leave SEO. So we're only for high school and below. And we don't do it by age, we do everything by audition. So if a very young child plays at a very high level, that child may be offered a spot in the youth orchestra, which is our most advanced orchestra, but generally has high school children. And the feeder organizations like the Repertory Orchestra, the Wind Orchestra, and the String Ensemble generally have younger and less experienced players.
So who is Susan Brome? You must be a performer of some kind.
I am not a performer.
At all? You haven't played anything?
No, I studied piano when I was a kid, just like just about everybody does, but I gave it up. And through the course of my adult years, I've done lots of things, but mostly related to nonprofit organizations, grant writing and administration. And used to live in New York City, worked for Pratt Institute Center for Community and Environmental Development.
Tied to the college, obviously.
Yes, tied to the planning department. And I was a grant writer for them. And then I also worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Smithsonian Institution. And then when we moved up to Saratoga Springs, where I live now, for a while I didn't work because I wanted to get to know the community. And then I worked as an editor for a social historian who was a freelancer. And then I worked for a collection of historic photographs that's part of the Historical Society of Saratoga Springs. And then I helped the Children's Museum get off the ground as a volunteer, and then I became a staff person there and worked on a capital campaign so that the Children's Museum could buy its own building. And it was
Which is the one at the Rensselaer Park?
No, in Saratoga Springs.
Yep,
the Children's Museum at Saratoga, it's called. And it was through that I had a connection to SEO, because a woman who worked here was on the board there, and she and I were friends, and our kids were friends. And she told me when they were looking for an executive director here and asked me if I would be willing to share my resume. So I said, okay. I wasn't really planning to look for something, and that's how it all began.
How long was that?
That was 2003.
Wow, so you've been at this a long time.
Yeah, and I still think of it as my new job.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
So was there a learning curve to the music piece of this, or was the administrative part of it obvious to you as you entered this, because you had a wide experience?
Yeah, well, there was a learning curve, and it's still going on. I mean, you always can learn something every day. But I have learned a lot about music production and music librarianship and all that kind of stuff, which I had no clue about before. The administrative part is pretty much, can cross from subject to subject, and it's handling people and working with donors and all that kind of stuff, which really does translate from one institution to another.
Yeah, interesting. So what drove you guys to, I assume you and somebody, to come to Saratoga?
Oh, well, my husband and I used to live in Brooklyn, and we had a little kid, and We lived in a neighborhood that didn't have good public schools, but we believed in public schools, and we did not believe in ferrying a child to a different neighborhood. So we said, we think we should move upstate, and we like cross-country skiing, and we wanted to be in a place that was colder and snowier. And we settled on Saratoga Springs, and we're very pleased. Now, of course, our son lives in California.
Oh, really? Near snow? In the mountains?
Well, he goes to, no, he lives in San Francisco, but he does go to Tahoe to ski.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what was your reaction the first few years in the region, culturally, personally?
Oh, well, I liked it very much. I very quickly became involved in arts and education in the schools. And at my son's elementary school, I worked on getting artists into the school and became friends with some of them, and became friends with some of the teachers, and was active that way. And I got to know that social historian who was a neighbor, and slowly but surely branched out into other aspects of Saratoga Springs culture. We live walking distance to downtown and walking distance to Skidmore, so it's very nice.
Yeah, cool. So SEO, before we get to its incredible trip this year, which is going to be the highlight of the interview, 1979, that's a lot of students who have benefited from the training, the connections, the music itself, all of it. How many of them have gone through? Do you have a sense of that?
Oh, yes. Oh, you mean in total thousands?
In total?
Several thousand. I don't know the total. Because many children are in for many years. You know, if they start out in string ensemble when they're in 4th or 5th grade and go up through repertory orchestra and youth orchestra, they could be here with 5, 6, 7 years. So that's not a different person, it's just a different position. So I don't really know, but it's...
I mean, but for them, the repertoire alone would be unaccomplishable any other way, except by this kind of a large regional effort.
Right. And well, in 1979, when SEO started, they didn't really plan to grow, but they responded to requests for additional ensembles, because there were kids in the region who wanted to have more than what their schools offered, and so they started the repertory orchestra. They called it the junior orchestra then, and then they started the string ensemble, and then they started a jazz ensemble because and a percussion ensemble, because people needed that. Most schools just have either a band and an orchestra, or a band or an orchestra, and they give group lessons. So this was a much more intensive musical training for kids who were really committed to music.
So from 2003, when you started, to now 2012, do you think schools have stayed the same in terms of what they offer students in music? Made reductions, as so many people say is the truth? What's your observation?
Our observation is that, especially in the last couple of years, school districts have been cutting because they've been subject to so much cuts themselves. I think the trend was for more and more offerings through the schools, and the school music departments are wonderful and give a tremendous amount to the kids, and also as a source for referrals to SEO. And we try to work as closely as we can with school music departments. But I think right now it's a tough time for public schools. We know of several positions that were cut, and in Schenectady, one of the middle schools closed. We don't exactly know how that's going to affect city strings in Schenectady, but we trust that it's going to continue in the other schools anyway.
So, but if you were to compare, but if you were to compare 2003 to 2012, and realizing there's fluctuations within that, how would you compare that decade within the schools? Do you think they're similar over the course
I think
of
they're
the decade?
similar, really. I mean, because the music teachers are totally dedicated to what they do and totally wonderful at what they do, and they all participate in NYSSMA. They all participate in various all-city, all-county things.
NYSSMA is the New York State Music.
Right, and and they support all the things that other schools do, and they support what we do. So just from a music point of view, I think it's the same, except that they're having to deal with reduced resources, monetary resources. But they're sacrificing all the time so that they can continue to offer what they do.
So back to the students for a minute. How many of these students, not that this matters, because I don't think this is the reason you're in existence, but how many of the students that have gone through SEO have continued as musicians?
A lot. We figure it's between 40 and 50% of each year's graduating group plans to pursue a career in music, not necessarily as performers, sometimes as engineers, sometimes as composers, sometimes as administrators, but definitely careers in music. And many of those do plan performing careers and do go to conservatory and do make it into major orchestras. We've got people who were SEOs,
SEOs, I like that, yeah.
SEO musicians in Chicago, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, in New York. Those are the famous ones, and lots more.
And probably a lot more than that.
Yeah,
I'm sure in
absolutely.
Albany, and I'm sure
yes.
in Buffalo, probably.
Yes.
Wow, that's really cool. That's
yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So this year, you guys just came off an incredible thing.
That's right. A
You
tour
went to
to
China,
to China and Korea. It started with Korea because Helen Chapyo, our music director, is Korean and goes to Korea a lot. And but she actually met the Korean man who was instrumental in our going in the United States at a conference. But they talked and became friends. And he is from the southern part of Korea and works with people with Hansen's disease, which is otherwise known as leprosy. And he's widely connected throughout Korea. And he, sometime after they met, he was talking with people about Expo and got us invited to perform at the World Expo in Yosu, Korea. And when we decided to accept the invitation, then we said, well, if we're going to Korea, we should really try to go to China as well. So that's how that came about. It wasn't China first, it was Korea first.
Wow, that's great. How many days was the trip?
It was 2 weeks.
And how many students participated?
About 86.
Out of 86, probably. Out of how
well,
many?
no, probably about 5 or 6 weren't able to participate.
Wow, that's wonderful.
And we had to hire a couple of ringers for a couple of...
Can you pick a couple highlight moments?
Of the tour?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was all absolutely amazingly wonderful. And, but highlights in Korea especially, we got to perform for 2 different groups of Hansen's disease survivors.
Oh my.
One at the hospital that this Dr. Kim is very deeply involved with, that's on the mainland, and one on Sorak Island, which he's also deeply involved with, that was completely isolated. The Hansen's disease people were moved there when the Japanese colonized Korea, and they were kind of enslaved there and stayed isolated completely until a bridge was built in the last year or so to the island. But they still are relatively isolated. So we performed for them and performed for the people on the mainland hospital ground, and it was astoundingly beautiful. The people just were so happy to be hearing live music that was for them especially, and by young people from America. It just was such a beautiful cultural exchange, and it was so wonderful for the kids to be able to give that to these people who were so deprived for such a long time. It was very touching.
Wow, that's really wonderful.
Yeah. So that, for me, those were the highlights. But then another highlight, and it's hard to prioritize these, but we performed for the 8th Army base in Seoul in a quite informal concert of patriotic music, and the place was full, and people were enthusiastic and wild and wonderful, and so happy to be given this gift of music there. It was fabulous.
And was there a moment in China that's worth
noting?
Yes,
oh yes, indeed. When we started out the planning, Helen Chapyo, the music director, was told that the Chinese people would like to have pretty much traditional classical music, and so she programmed that. And then when they learned that we had a concerto competition winner who was a Chinese girl who played a Chinese piece, they said, "Oh, couldn't you please bring that piece? That's the Butterfly Lovers." And we said, "I guess we can." So Lisa Liu, the violinist who won the concerto competition, performed in China to Chinese audiences, one in Shanghai and one in Beijing, and with relatives from her family who had never heard her perform there, and a Chinese audience that was wildly enthusiastic. It was absolutely touching and beautiful, and Lisa is a fabulous violinist and a wonderful person. So
that's spectacular.
Yeah.
So are you guys conceiving where you might go next?
We've talked about lots of different things. We've talked about South America. We've been to Europe 4 times. We might go back to Europe. People have talked about Australia, so we don't know.
I toured an orchestra once. I know, it's not easy.
Where did you go?
We went just to Britain, and you know, so the language wasn't a barrier, but oh my God. No, a lot of fun, a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
And that was before it was so hard to be in a plane.
Coming up, our first concert is a jazz concert at the College of St. Rose on October 19th. Our second concert is a youth orchestra concert here at Proctors, our free concert for senior citizens on October 24th, and then the youth orchestra's concert on November 10th at Troy Savings Bank Music Hall.
Terrific.
And you can check our website, www.sco.org, to see a full schedule.
Well, Susan, fantastic work. Just fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of all the kids of the Capital Region for what you do.
Thank you for being our landlord.
Oh, we love being your landlord. This is Philip Morris. Our guest was Susan Brome of the Empire State Youth Orchestra, SCO. Thank you for joining us at Impact. Proctors, bringing the best in arts, education, and entertainment.